straight from the mayor's mouth, with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
Hello Matthew, and we have got a lot to get through because of these standing committee meetings. Now, standing committee meetings mean, folks, that this is the direction that council will go when they meet later in the month, and got quite a few things to get through. So good to see you opposite me again.
Thank you, Richard. And you're right, standing committee meetings, I really like the concept of taking things to standing committees before they're finally resolved at a council meeting. And it was interesting because during the last term of council, standing committees had delegated authority to resolve council decisions. And that confused people because they'd heard it had been to a committee meeting, and I wonder when it will go to council, or I wonder when council will resolve that decision. So we changed that back when we gave the delegated authority to different meeting or committees. The only thing we've got with standing committees is they can resolve a tender, so they can make an official decision about a tender. But a tender is a bit different in terms of you're not getting lobbied by the community around a tender. So, yeah, I like the concept. So the decisions we made, or the recommendations we made on Thursday night, are not finally resolved until they go to council in 2 weeks.
Couldn't agree with you more, and that's the way council should operate, and that's where council laws and the mayor have the power to pass all those bits and pieces at a council meeting, and we go on from there. Okay, standing committee meeting held on Thursday night. Expressions of interest on the Dream Festival was zip, I believe. None.
Well, no, we did get two in the end. There were none originally, but we were told there was a technical issue, and some people who tried to submit an EOI couldn't do that. So we opened it back up again, and that was from the last council meeting, opened it back up again. And from this one then, there were two that were received. Now, one of those two that was received was essentially saying, we don't think we can run it, but we will support someone else in running it. So it was a expression of support for someone else. The other one was one that was received, and it talked a lot about the general focus, if you like, for what that organisation could do, the skills they had, etc. It didn't really enunciate clearly what was going to be delivered by Dream, and it was described by our staff as almost being a reluctant EOI, and I'm a bit confused about that. I'm going to have some more discussions over the next 2 weeks about this before we get to the next council meeting, because I want to find out exactly how keen that organisation is to actually
so there's hope.
There's still hope there at this stage.
A little bit of hope.
The recommendation that is going through to council is that the Dream be put into abeyance, and the $40,000 that was allocated to Dream be used for two of our other funds. But whether that'll be the final decision of council or not, I'm not sure. But that's the current recommendation. So if you've got an opinion, you want to tell your friendly local council about what they should do, then grab the phone, send an email, whatever, talk to your fellow to your councillors, to your local councillors, and tell them what you think about it. But at this stage, if the recommendation's followed, it'll be put in abeyance for at least a year.
Just before we go to the next item, and I just want to let people know that I've got a hook here, and the hook is we'll do the Dubbo Regional Livestock Market Expressions of Interest. We'll leave that till the very last of our discussions today.
Sure thing.
Okay, the standing committee meetings continue, and there was discussion about the Dubbo Firming Power Station. Let's go back to the original on that one. It's a good one.
Yeah, it is a good one, and there's a slight twist in this one as well, which will be interesting. All the renewable energy projects that you see that are happening around our area, and ones that are technically part of the RES, ones that aren't part of the RES, all of these different ones, what we as a council try to do is get a voluntary planning agreement. They don't have to. This is one of my great frustrations that I talk to state and federal government about. There's no compulsory process where they've got to give money to the local council to improve our local area. But we negotiate, and we've got a standard framework that we use, which we say we would like 1.5% of the capital investment value of the project to be given to council to improve the area, especially where this is having an impact. So, for example, if you've got a farm that's having a solar farm or being changed to a solar farm, then there's an impact in terms of what happens with the local community, with the farmers and the local contractors, and the inputs that might be bought from some of the local companies there. So the idea is to essentially have some sort of funds that go back into the local community. Now, this firming power station is quite interesting. It's a proposal by Squadron Energy, so it's not secret, so that's in the public domain. And what they want to do is they want to produce hydrogen with excess renewable power. So it'll be green hydrogen. And then when you need firming power, in other words, when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing, you need some way of easily and quickly being able to bring on power. And in the old days with coal-fired power, they could ramp that up or down as needed. But with a firming power station, what that does is basically brings that energy in when it's needed. By using green hydrogen, you're still using a clean form of energy rather than burning coal. Now, initially, this will probably use a combination of green hydrogen and some other form of gas, whether it be natural gas or some other form of gas, and some form of a mixture. And then eventually at the stage where it's all using hydrogen. So that's a good project. It's in an industrial area in Dubbo, an industrial zoned area there. And again, overall, a good project. Now, we approached Squadron and said, well, this is kind of like a renewable project, so would you be interested in entering into a planning agreement, a voluntary planning agreement around this? And I must admit, Squadron Energy have been very good to deal with in terms of renewables. They've been very easy to negotiate these various voluntary planning agreements. In this case, their argument was, well, it's not really a wind or a solar or a battery project, but sure, we'll have a conversation with you. We got at the stage where we got a 0.5%, not 1.5%, 0.5% capital investment value. And because it wasn't really a compulsory part of it and there's no direct impacts in our community as a result of this, they said, can we look at your strategic plan to see what projects you've got coming up and where we might be able to spend the money that effectively we're granting to you? And we thought that was a fair enough request. So they looked through our plan. They picked out our public art strategy. So this will be $950,000, not spread over the next 25 years, $950,000 upfront payment to basically enhance or really start to roll out our public art strategy. So that's a good win. There's a strategic project we had. We didn't have it funded. Suddenly we've got some funding for it. The slight twist at the committee meetings on Thursday night was that it was proposed by a councillor that we restrict the public art strategy to a 15-kilometre radius of where the firming power station would be, which basically means in Dubbo. So not Wangarba, not Geurie, not Wellington, basically having all that money spent in Dubbo. There was a fair bit of debate back and forth. I didn't agree with it, and again, it's not a council resolution yet, so I'm allowed to disagree with some fellow councillors on this.
I mean, there's for's and against, isn't there? I mean, it could go to Ollie Robbins and what's going to happen down there.
It could go anywhere.
Just as a suggestion. Yeah,
that's right. Now, the idea of the public art strategy is it's an LGA-wide public art strategy, and as of the day we're recording this particular podcast and when it is released, it's the 8-year anniversary of the amalgamation. And one of the things that certainly I wasn't happy about the amalgamation when it was all happening, but we've moved on 8 years. We've been dealt a hand. We've got to deal with that hand. So at the moment, my logic is we've got one LGA, 7,536 square kilometres. We've got to deal with that as one LGA rather than still say the old Wellington Shire or the old Dubbo City Council. So in this case, I would say we should just use it for our public art strategy across the whole LGA. That might be some in Ollie Robbins Oval. It might be some down the main street of Wellington, wherever it might be. The debate went back and forth on Thursday night. In the end, the decision, the recommendation from council, not a unanimous decision, was to have the public art strategy restricted to within 15 kilometres of that firming power station. What will happen in 2 weeks' time at the council meeting, I'm not sure, but that was the decision, the recommendation. But the good news is $950,000 for a public art strategy, which we didn't have funded in the past. That's a very good news story.
Now, there's a federal government grant application in for the Wiradjuri Cultural Tourism Centre. This is getting a bit long in the tooth, this one. Have we seen any money? And I believe somewhere track there's $350 million allocated, not to the Wiradjuri Centre, but throughout the country for projects such as this.
Well, we haven't received any information yet. We have been talking to them.
There is a grant in, though, isn't there?
We've got an application in, definitely, and I think it absolutely ticks all the boxes. This would be a fantastic facility. It'd be approximately a $15 million facility, of which we would have about $2 million, just over $2 million of council money spent on that. And I'm pretty happy with that as an outcome for what would be a fantastic facility if it only costs us $2 million when you've got $15 million facility built. Now, the application that went in was as part of a program that was submitted on the 15th of January, and we were told at the time that the funds would be allocated or announcements would be made in about 6 to 8 weeks. So if we take the worst case scenario, 15th of January, then that's maybe middle of March-ish. And we were told maybe a month ago that the decision was imminent, that we would hear an outcome from that any moment now. This is part of the Growing Regions program from the federal government. Now, and it's 300 million, sorry, not 350 million, $300 million was available in round one of that particular program. Now, we have been told, interesting enough, that the Australian National Audit Office has been appointed to audit the program. Now, I found that interesting because no funds have been allocated or announced yet out of this 300 million. And for the audit office to be looking at that before any funds have been announced sounds interesting. So whether that then holds up the whole process because they've got to go through a process, work out where the funds are, et cetera, maybe they've already got all the places where the money's going ticked off and they're just waiting to be submitted to the audit office. But it becomes a bit of a problem for us because we've got certain deadlines on some of the other funding that's part of this program, so we really can't wait around forever for that to happen. We have got the whole construction timelines ready to go if we do get the grant funding. So basically, if we get a yes, we can hit the ground running and take off straight away. We're not going to start to say, let's get the planning going on that. But it would be nice to know, well, it would be nice to have a yes, definitely.
Obviously.
But it would be nice to have at least an answer on where those funds are going, if they are going somewhere. And there'll be round two and et cetera of that as well. So if we don't get round one, then we can look further at what might happen further than that. But look, I have high hopes for it because it does tick all the boxes and I think it'll be a great facility for Dubbo. So stay tuned. As soon as we know, the public will know.
Well, I don't know what to think about this one. You're calling tourists goats around the Wellington Caves. What's happening with goats around the Wellington Caves?
It's one of those ones where there sometimes are different solutions for things. Now, we've got the Wellington Caves and we've got land around the Wellington Caves, and we looked at that and we need to keep that in some form of reasonable growth or low levels of growth because it's a bushfire hazard. And sure, at the moment, coming to winter, it's been raining, not a bushfire hazard, but you're always planning ahead. It costs us money to basically remove some of the bushfire hazards. We've got neighbours around that area that say, well, I don't really want to be looking after my patch of dirt, and look over the fence and you've got areas out of control which are just asking for a bushfire to take over. So we had some discussions with the Rural Fire Service, and they suggested an interesting solution, which is goats. They've been running a trial in this area now. We've just started this, where we're going to utilise goats for hazard reduction. Now, they've been doing the trial already in other areas, and so they've got further funding for this to basically run with these goats through to the end of this financial year and then hopefully beyond. So we've got an area there now that's being grazed. If you go past Wellington Caves, you'll see an area being grazed. They basically do 1 hectare at a time. They put up some temporary electric fences, keep the goats in that area. It grazes, or they graze that area down, then they move it along to the next area. So in terms of a good solution, a good natural solution, I'm not sure what happens with the goats after they've been grazing for a while, whether somewhere they go and visit, where they go and be used for some other purpose, maybe an abattoir perhaps, but I don't know about that part of the program. I just know at the moment that the Rural Fire Service has got this program in place and goats are being used down there. So if you see goats around the Wellington Caves, you know it's part of that ongoing program.
They're eating the grass. Very quickly on this one, Mr. Mayor, I believe you've been riding in the dark and the tracker Riley Cycleway, and you being the bike rider that you are, what's wrong with the lights?
Yeah, they're not working. And
they're not working, obviously.
One part of it anyway, not working, and we've had a bit of feedback from a few different people. I didn't actually raise this one. I had noticed there when I was out riding early one morning that the lights were off, and I didn't take too much notice of it. I actually wondered whether there was enough light, because I normally ride around about 6 o'clock in the morning and there's a little bit of light coming out then. I thought there might have been enough light, maybe that turned off a bit early, but we had a bit of feedback to say the lights in one section from LH Ford across to Tamworth Street, so along the track there. So those lights aren't working there, and so we're basically aware of this issue now. Some people have told us about it. We've got our staff under some contractors. We actually contacted the original electrician who installed those lights along there, and so they're having a look at this. The Tracker Riley is a popular area, obviously very popular during summer when you've got lots of hours of daylight for people to be out in the morning, early in the morning, walking or running or riding, and the same with early or late in the evening. In winter, it doesn't get used as much. I do notice certainly fewer people are out using it in winter for obvious reasons, a bit colder, but there's still people out using it. So we will have that particular issue fixed. I know during one flooding event we did obviously cut off all the power because of all underground cabling there, we cut off the power to that, and then you basically restore that power after flooding, but some of that is underwater there. Whether or not there's some part that just needs to be fixed up from that, I'm not sure, but we know about it, we're on to it, and we'll have those lights restored as soon as possible, not just for my benefit.
Yeah. Previous council administration were very hesitant about going into public-private partnerships. Now, Squadron Energy, great name, are doing advanced wastewater treatment, and they're very good at it. And how's that going to relate to our water treatment and what's happening there?
And you'll remember, I think it was probably, I won't say their names, but former general managers of council, if you said PPP, public-private partnership, they had a few shivers that went down their spine and the hair stood up in their arms, because there have been cases around the state where PPPs have been incredibly unsuccessful with councils. So the idea of a PPP is basically when you've got a project that's relying on a private organisation and a public organisation like a council to do a project together. And because you're always at a council level, you're always doing things in an open and transparent way where everyone can be part of it, entering into a relationship with one organisation is always a risky process. In this particular one, we've actually gone through to the Office of Local Government and we just got the letter back. In fact, I had a conversation when I was in Sydney during the week. I had a conversation with Brett Whitworth, who's the DepSec of Office of Local Government, but we've got a formal letter back to basically tell us that this is a low risk, or I think the exact words were, this particular PPP project is not significant and not high risk as defined by OLG's guidelines. Now, when they say not significant, then it is significant from a local perspective, but in their PPP process is not significant. So go back a couple of steps. We've got a water treatment facility here in Dubbo where we treat anywhere from, say, 8 to 10 gigalitres of water per year. We've got to have licences for 8 to 10 gigs of water, and those licences might be bore water, they might be from the river, but we don't get any preference over other licences that, say, farmers might have. We treat that water, we send it out through our pipes, people's houses, they use it for their showers and washing up and drinking and all the rest of it. About 35% of that water goes onto their gardens, and so that's great that we've got that potable water there, but a lot goes in onto your gardens. We don't have a dual reticulated system like some towns do, where you have grey water for gardens, for example, or non-potable water for gardens and then potable water to drink. You go down the other end where you put that through toilets, showers, through your sink, and it ends up at our sewage treatment plant. Around about 3 to 4 gigs of that water goes through there, and then way back in your first term on council was when the problem was the problem was being put forward by the EPA at the time, I think, where they're going to charge you to put water back into the river out of the sewage treatment plant. And so the council at the time, and I'm talking back around the 1999 to 2004 council, came up with a great idea of taking that water and taking it to a farm. So you bought a farm during that term of council from memory.
That's right, we did.
Yep, and the water is taken out to a farm, and then council owns a farm where I think mainly lucerne is grown with that water because you've got a good supply.
No, we grew wheat as well.
Wheat, okay, right.
Yeah.
So I think at the moment it's mainly lucerne being grown there. So that's a good solution to a problem, if you like, in terms of having the water coming out there. But that water obviously is not potable and it's used to grow crops. Now,
it grew very good crops because it had additives.
So Pine Haven, I think, was the property name. It's still there.
It was partially treated.
Yeah, that's right. So with all of that, we've started to talk about, is there any other way we could use that 3 or 4 gigs of water we get each year in a better way than just going out and growing a crop? And in the discussions around that, we were approached by Squadron Energy, and they said we need a guarantee of water for construction. We've got a lot of construction coming up. We've got a number of renewable energy projects coming up, and it's not good enough just to go and try and buy some water from some various farmers or go onto the water market and buy water. We might pay a lot for it. But in submitting their proposals to the state government, these are state significant developments, they've got to be able to demonstrate that they've got everything under control, including enough water. So they approached us and they said, could we use some of that water? And in the discussion we had there, that water is not of a high enough standard for them to use for their construction. So we said, we'd be happy to let you use that water. We'll either charge you for it, or maybe you could treat that water to a high enough standard to use for your construction. In other words, you build a facility that would need to treat that water to a high enough standard. And then we might be able to use that water later on for watering our fields or doing something else with it. So that's where we're at the moment. But before we could go any further, we had to go through that process with the Office of Local Government, because this technically is defined as a PPP. So we've gone through to Office of Local Government. They've now given us the letter back, which I mentioned before. And so essentially now we've got the amber light, maybe, not quite the green light, to go full steam ahead and see where we end up with this whole project. Now, there's still more to work out. There's still technicalities to go through. But the concept of using that sewage treatment water that comes out for something other than just going out to Pine Avon and essentially watering a lucerne crop or a wheat crop, I think the concept is absolutely brilliant. We've just got to get the technicalities right on that. So stay tuned for this one. Again, the whole idea of this podcast is to keep people up to date with what's happening, and there's a really interesting thing that's happening.
I've always loved this name, the Scabbing Flat Bridge at Geurie. It's on the Peachville Road, and basically it's like the Rawsonville Bridge. It's of the same construction, and it needs a bit of a tidy up. It needs a better load limit, and there is a bridge program in place with council. Where does the Scabbing Flat Bridge appear on that particular list, if at all?
Well, it's an interesting one. The Scabbing Flat Bridge, and it is a lovely name, isn't it?
Oh, wonderful.
It's very similar, as you correctly said, very similar to the Rawsonville Bridge. In other words, it's got heritage significance. So you'd like to be able to just take some old timber bridges and knock them down and build a new, better bridge there. But that's been a part of the frustration we've had with things like the Rawsonville Bridge, which again is not owned by council as such. But the Scabbing Flat Bridge is another example of one where we can't just go and get it replaced. You're probably aware in years gone by there have been bridge replacement programs in place. So those bridge replacement programs are to get rid of all those old timber bridges and put nice new concrete bridges. People that go past the bridge out at Rawsonville would see a huge construction job there at the moment. They're leaving the Rawsonville Bridge, the original Rawsonville Bridge, because it's got heritage significance, and they're building a nice new concrete bridge right beside it there. So that's one solution. The Scabbing Flat Bridge, and that's probably about an $18.9 million solution, again by the state government there. That's not our bridge, so that's fine from that perspective. There's no cost to council or residents here. But one of the problems we've got with this one is that we would like to see something happen with this one as well, but it's a bigger bridge. The estimation is probably that it would be more like a $30 million replacement, and the state government hasn't made any announcement yet about doing something there in terms of replacing that particular bridge. So it's a bit frustrating for residents out there. There's a load limit on that at the moment, so that load limit as such will keep limited traffic there. But we've been talking to the state government, and I think the process has been that Transport for New South Wales has been actually meeting with some people out there in terms of telling them what's happening with it there. But it's one of those things, A, we don't have the money, B, it's not our bridge, but we want the state government to do something about it. And just to clarify there, you said it was Peachville Road. I think it's actually on Arthurville Road.
Arthurville. Did I say Peachville?
Yeah.
Arthurville, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I was just thinking about that as you said. I'm sure it's on Arthurville
That's
Road.
That's not right, yeah.
Because it's out there. I actually race mountain bikes out there. It's out near what we call our old homestead course, and I was sure that was on Arthurville Road. So, yes.
So I know the road well, actually. It's a nice road to drive along.
Yeah, and so people that are familiar with Scabbing Flat Bridge Creek would know that, and I just want to make sure I get things absolutely accurate on this podcast. So I'm sure they'd be familiar and be jumping all over it if we gave them wrong information. But it's the Scabbing Flat Bridge. We'll keep working on that with Transport for New South Wales, but we don't control it. Again, we don't have the funds to control it. We don't control it. So it goes back. It's what's an example is known as a Dare Truss Bridge. So it was built in 1911. And some people would say to me that it's an old timber bridge, just knock it down and build a new one. That's not our decision to make, unfortunately. And I'm not trying to put forth an opinion there one way or the other, but it's not our decision to make around that. So there's currently a 16-tonne load limit on it. That'll stay in place. Maybe they'll do some work on it, Transport New South do some work on it to improve that load limit and take off that load limit, but it's still, I know when I've ridden a pushbike across there, it's not a great old bridge there. So stay tuned for that. If we do, or if Transport New South Wales does do something with that, they'll do something with that in terms of putting another bridge beside it, but that'll need some realignment of the road as well.
Let's hope we get that money from a big lump of money that the state government have allocated for bridges in rural New South Wales.
Yeah, and again, I don't think there's any plans for that bridge, any forward plans for that bridge, even if they allocate a big chunk of money in the near future, but they're aware of it.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, they're aware of it, they know about it, and we'll just have to hope that they do something with it. So anyway, that's an update on that one.
Well, Matt, you've been a very busy boy this week in Sydney, and you've had the mayor's discussions, country mayors getting together, but you've also met with a number of ministers, and I'm wondering if we've got time to go through the whole lot. But anyway, certainly I think that you have met and basically looking at Jenny Aitchison, the MP for Regional Transport and Roads in Parliament House, some good discussions there.
Yeah, some good ones. I'll go back one step before that one. One of the meetings we had was the Standing Committee on State Development and their latest inquiry, which started on I think it was probably the 14th of March, it actually opened, was the ability of local governments to fund infrastructure and services. So basically, financial sustainability was the bottom line for that one. Are local governments financially sustainable? And I do worry a little bit about when we have a discussion that starts off with are local governments financially sustainable? Is that the first step towards more amalgamations? I'm not sure. I hope they take a bit of a different view. But we met with 4 members of that, the chair, Emily Saval, the deputy chair, Sam Farraway, and then some members, Amanda Cohn and Peter Primrose. So we met with them and talked around a whole range of different things. And this was with regional cities, New South Wales. So there were a number of our members there, 15 members in that group. Some of the views put forward were interesting. I think one of the views put forward certainly was the fact that it's very difficult to budget in terms of putting forward a good budget to our community when you've got your fingers crossed for some of the grants that might come in. Having grant money allocated either a long time in advance or having a certain amount of money to go to local councils so they can budget effectively on those was one of the points put forward. And again, in that discussion, it was, well, if we just put a whole chunk of money forward to local government, what would we come and cut ribbons on from the state government's perspective? And again, we said, we'll find things for you to cut ribbons on if that's all it takes. But if that's the only reason you want to have individual grant funds is because you want to cut ribbons, we'll find some ribbons for you to cut. But it would make it so much easier from a budgeting perspective. The other thing that was discussed, rate pegging, I think most people agree is probably here to stay. State governments don't love the idea of getting rid of rate pegging. But one of the things was, one of the particular members said that rate pegging then has to be voted on by each council. And then there's pressure from the community not to take up that rate pegging amount. And there'll always be 1 or 2 populist councillors on every council, everyone around the room nodded that that's the case, where they'll say, oh, we won't put the rates up. But of course, that is an absolute certain way not to be financially sustainable. Rate pegging is designed to be around about CPI. So if you go for a rate rise of CPI, you're basically staying on track with inflation. So you're not getting ahead, but you're not falling behind. You don't take those rate pegs, you are definitely falling behind and your community will suffer. So one of the points that was put forward was just make the announcement that this is how much your rates are going up by. And IPART, the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal, makes that decision with all of the information they have. So just make that decision. So again, this is the beginning of an inquiry. It's only been going for a little while. There's a long way for it to go. Who knows what the outcomes will be. Hopefully it won't be amalgamations, but that's certainly where we started with that particular one. But it's good to get to talk to that committee as well. All
right, with the country mayors, you spoke with IPART again. We'll get back to that in a minute. But I do want to get back to basically the Honourable Jenny Aitchison, who is the Minister for Regional Transport and Roads, and the Pinch Point program with the 10 critical spots in New South Wales. Is one of those the Great Western Highway over the Blue Mountains?
So we basically got money from the state government. It was about $440,000, and we did a pinch point program across the state. So this was, again, regional cities. And from that, the consultants that we hired and the information they had from councils, we came up with 93 pinch points, $3.9 billion to fix those. We didn't think that was a reasonable ask of the state government to do that straight up. So we narrowed it down and said we want the 10 most significant pinch points in the state, so where the congestion is the most for freight movements, and those 10 would cost $350 million to fund. 3 of those were in the Dubbo local government area. So essentially that's what we presented to Jenny to say, here are these pinch points, here are the 10 critical ones. Now, we don't expect them to hand over $350 million tomorrow, but the good part about it is we use the same methodology that the state government uses when they're analysing roads. And essentially from that, we've then got the ability to say, here's the work that's already done for you. You would do the same thing if you spent the time doing it, but we've done that work for you. They always talk about the BCR, basically the return on investment. What's the BCR? And they don't want to fund anything that's below 1. The BCR on this project, or those 10 projects, came up to 1.02, so it's above 1, but that's good. And so talking to Jenny and certainly her staff, they said, yes, that's good, it ticks all the boxes. The budget will come out. We don't have much money, but we know we've got something to work towards. So these are the 10 we identified. $350 million required for these 10 is what we've asked for from the state government, or at least we've given the information. So the 10 in order. The first pinch point, the worst pinch point we've got there, is the Union Street Railway Bridge in Lismore. It's got some accessibility constraints. Number 2 is Heilgens Lane and Bergman's Lane, an alternate heavy vehicle route there required. Number 3 is Boothenbar Road, Newell Highway and Dubbo. There's some safety issues there. Number 4 is the Hume Highway at Goulburn. There's some congestion issues there. Number 5 is Wheelers Lane, Dubbo, accessibility constraints. Number 6 is Boothenbar Road, Dubbo, with congestion constraints. Number 7 is Kyogle Road to Rosehill Road and Rifle Range Road at Tunkester, accessibility constraints. Number 8, Karaki Road to Wairella Ferry Road at South Gundarimba, accessibility constraints. Number 9 is Windellama Road in Goulburn, connection issues from the Hume Highway. And number 10, Lambs Avenue, O'Connor Road, Dangar Street, Railway Road, Kentucky Street in Armidale, congestion issues. So they're the top 10 of the 93 that we identified.
Right. You also met with the Honourable Paul Scully, who's been in State Parliament for years. Perhaps it seems like a century. He's been around for a long time, but he now has the Minister for Planning and Public Spaces, and he is looking at planning again. And there's been a lot of talk about planning, not only in regional areas, but certainly in the city region, high-rise near railway stations. We've had high-rise here, high-rise there, and certainly extending more land in regional areas for housing.
Yeah, a couple of things that we talked about with Paul, and look, I think he's on top of the things that are happening there, and he's got a major problem in his hands in terms of housing, but he's also got a major problem on his hands in terms of the planning portal. The planning portal was a concept introduced to make planning more transparent, to let people have access to planning, so that when you're putting in a DA, you put the information into the portal and it's there for everyone to see. And isn't that fantastic and wonderful and open and transparent? Except it doesn't work. And that's a major problem.
Well, I mean, that is the problem, because you put a DA in, council look at it, but it has to be approved by the state all the time. It goes backwards and forwards. And as you say, it's not working.
Well, the part that's not working is the technical part of the planning portal.
True.
So this is the issue. It's at the point now, we've talked to a number of the cities in regional cities, and for example, I know Dubbo and Bathurst is another one that have got a full-time dedicated staff member to manage the planning portal for something that's meant to make planning more efficient. Now, the good news is that Paul has heard the feedback from our councils, from regional cities in New South Wales. He's heard the feedback from planners across the state. He's heard the feedback from their own staff in the planning department that this thing isn't working. So he knows that. He's aware of that. He says, yes, I'm sorry, we'll get it right. So they're throwing a lot of resources at getting the planning portal right, which is music to ears of everyone, but it's still not there yet. So that's certainly one issue. Housing is another one, and unlocking more land for housing, and there's a whole range of ways to do that, whether that might be unused Crown land, for example, whether that might be different densities of housing that you can access. But again, I think the fact that Paul's in the room talking to us and actually asking for solutions. So when you've got 15 cities representing 1 million people in the room, then the smart ministers, and Paul's certainly one of those, say, tell me what we can do as a state government to make this problem better for you. And so you've got feedback from a group of councils there in one hit. So that's been very effective, I think, and certainly he's been listening to that. No solutions have been developed that are going to suddenly hit the ground tomorrow, but we need to keep developing these solutions. We can't keep ignoring it because places like Dubbo, we need more housing stock. People want to be in Dubbo, but they need somewhere to live when they come here.
You also met with the Minister, the Honourable John Graham, MLC, with all these titles: the Minister of State, Minister for Roads, Minister for the Arts, Minister for Music and Nighttime Economy, Minister for Jobs and Tourism, and it's tourism that I want to talk about. And you spoke to him about tourism and some plans that are really going to help Dubbo with tourism.
Indeed, and I did have someone have a bit of a chuckle at this because I posted on my social media sites, and they said, Minister for the Nighttime Economy, that's too much for me. Some people weren't that impressed. But
wasn't that to get cafes back in King's Cross or something or other?
I think you're probably spot on, actually. Yeah. So he does have a lot of portfolios, and they've got a few ministers loaded up with a lot of portfolios, obviously very capable ministers loaded up with those portfolios. But for tourism, one of the things that I really liked, and we've talked to John before about this in terms of, he said, I'm thinking of going this way. I wanted to get a bit of feedback from regional cities, and we gave him a bit of feedback previously, and then he came along to talk to us again and said, I'm progressing down that path. Now, there's a couple of things there. When people come to Sydney, they turn up to Sydney from overseas or even from other states, and they go, oh, look, there's the Opera House. Isn't that pretty? Let's have a photo in front of it. And that's it. But what he's keen to do is create more tourism around experiences. Now, that was music to my ears, and certainly for many members of regional cities, music to their ears, because we have great experiences. You don't just say, oh, there's Taronga Western Plains Zoo, I'll drive past, take a photo and continue on. You go into the zoo. You have an experience in the zoo. You go around and you look up close at the animals. You go to the hospital, the animal hospital in the zoo. You might stay at Safari and go for an early morning visit or an early morning walk around the zoo. It's a real experience in the zoo. Even things like the Royal Flying Doctor Service Visitor Experience Centre or the Old Dubbo Jail or Wellington Caves, going down into the caves. These are experiences. These are things that you experience rather than just look at. And so John is very keen to see more of these experiences, and I love that idea. The other thing that I think is good from talking to John is that you've got international tourists, but they spend most of their time in Sydney. And it is, again, you've got the Opera House, you've got the Harbour Bridge, you've got lovely Sydney there, and that's great. That attracts people to Sydney. It's not sensible for businesses, tourism businesses in regional New South Wales to spend a lot of money in international sites to try and attract visitors, because you're just having to spread your money way too thin. You're not getting a good return on your investment. But if they're already coming to Sydney and the state government is saying, while you're here in Sydney, now you've come to our state, go and experience the state. Go out there into the state and actually have an experience in the state. Go to Taronga Western Plains Zoo. Go to these places and experience things. And that, to me, again, was music to my ears.
Well, coming west, when you think about it, the tourist experiences are very few and far between. After the Blue Mountains, there is an experience in Bathurst if you've got anything to do with racing, car racing.
Yeah.
But, okay, so you drive around there for 10 minutes, that's it. Full stop, pens down. Orange have little food weeks and things like that. They don't have ongoing experiences like we do. And I don't know, I've always said this, and I've said to people in Sydney, why don't you catch the train? It leaves in the morning. You arrive at lunch or just after lunch, you have a lunch on the train, hire a car and off you go. And a couple of people, English cousins, did exactly that, loved it. 3 days.
Yeah.
They went to Mudgee and they went to the caves. They did the zoo. In fact, they did the zoo for a day and a half.
And that's what most people do. It's a 2-day pass when you buy a ticket to the zoo. So they're the sort of things we're talking about, coming out and experience it. Now, I still think that you've got things to look at. If you are a racing fan, there's a great museum there in Bathurst, for example, or on one of the race weekends, whether it be the 24-hour or the old Hardy Ferodo, the Bathurst 1000, when you've got those events on, if that event is on, so it's an experience being there, but when you come out over the mountains, you might say, well, now I've come out this far, what else is out here to experience? So I think we can all work with each other. And yes, we've got the zoo 365 days of the year. Fantastic. We don't have a big event like a Bathurst or a Tamworth Country Music. But again, I think that's where we can work together and let them experience some of our experiences in times when those other events aren't on. When those events are on, that can be a way to draw people to our area. But I do like the approach that John's taking along those lines. Do certainly like the fact that it's looking at tourism from a slightly different lens, a slightly different angle, and that just means we've got more opportunities here where we are.
Well, on Friday you met with country mayors and you had a day of speakers. Just noticing the speakers were all ladies except for Professor Joseph Dew. I want to get on to Carmel Donnelly, who spoke about IPART. Now, what was said at IPART, rate pegging, grants for councils, in fact, money for councils, full stop.
Not much about grants, and that's probably not really IPART's job to look at grants. But
they touch on the edge of it, though.
Yeah, certainly more about rate pegging, and there's a discussion around rate pegging. And this is something where they have changed the methodology. They got a very negative response from councils across the state a couple of years ago when their rate pegging amount was about 6% below what general inflation was seen as. And obviously councils around the state said, well, how can we possibly keep up to date with that sort of rate pegging amount? They did go back and review that methodology, and now the methodology, which was spoken about more at Country Mayors, was around each individual council and certain indicators, certain components of each individual council means that every council gets their own individualised rate peg amount. Now, it might end up being the same. So, for example, Dubbo ended up being 5.0%. Some other councils got 4.7%. Some got 5.2%. So you end up being probably similar in terms of what they end up with, but there's different methodology now, which I think is incredibly important to customise those rate pegging amounts for each individual council. So certainly when IPART talks about things like that, that's usually where the focus is, rate pegging, and councils in the room. I wanted to ask a lot of questions about that. The other one, if I can just mention it, was the audit office.
Yes.
And I thought that was an important one. It used to be, back in the old days, where a council could tender out their process for auditing under the Office of Local Government, in other words, under the guidelines of the Office of Local Government, and you would go out as a council and find your own auditor. It was changed. The rules were changed where councils had to use the audit office. No chance to do anything else, so a monopoly. And prices went up this year for some councils, maybe 30%. And what opportunity did you have to say, I don't want to pay an extra 30%? None. The state government said, you will use the audit office, and the audit office will tell you how much you will pay. Now, there was one council in particular in the room when they were asking questions at the end who said, well, we're not signing the document. We're not doing it. Now, you've got to do it. This is an interesting one because the state government says you're a council, we control what you do. You've got to basically take this up. And they said, we're not signing it until you can justify how you can put up our audit fees by 30% for doing the same job. And the answer that came back from the audit office was not that convincing, I must admit. There was not a lot of confidence in the audit office when some of the answers were given. So they talked about the fact that we want to control this, we want to be in control of the audit, so we think it's better that we do it. And it's more expensive to do audit, so we're putting it up by 30%. But this is after IPART has already said that, well, 5% is all you can have as a rate peg, for example, but your expenses by the same government are going up by 30% with an audit. And then they said, but we're so busy with all the audits that we've now taken on because we've said that you've all got to use the audit office. We're now outsourcing that to various contractors and they're charging us more. And it turns out they're outsourcing it to the same accounting firms that were doing the individual audits for those councils in the first place. So now you've just had a middleman introduced in the process, which, surprise, surprise, makes it more expensive. And one council certainly got up and said, this was just an excuse for some of those accounting firms to charge you more because they were no longer putting in a competitive tender for their local council. they were now doing a job for the state government, so suddenly their prices went up. So basically, they were having a lend of the state government in putting their prices up. And then the audit office said, well, we had to support those local accounting firms because without audits of the council, they'd go broke. Now, I don't think accounting firms are relying on that one job. But then someone said, well, the auditor that was assigned to us was a council out of Victoria. How do you work that out? So their answers were all over the place. I must admit, it's a pretty disappointing situation. It would be much better to go back to how it was before, where essentially each council could go out and find their own auditor, and it had to sit under the guidelines of the audit office, and the audit officers still looked over it at the end of it all. So it was good to have someone stand up in front of us and to hear direct feedback from the councils in the room. Unfortunately, it wasn't the boss that was standing there in front of us, and it wasn't the state government standing there in front and listening to this, because I think they need to review that decision definitely.
Well, we'll wait and see. Matt, I've left this till second last actually, and this is to do with the Dubbo regional livestock markets. Now, before you say anything, I have been through the audit, I've been through the figures, I've been through everything, and I've spent a couple of hours looking at it as far as the money's concerned, and I can assure people with the rumour of about $23 million sitting in a bank account for the livestock regional livestock markets is a fallacy, an absolute fallacy. Now, you might have the figures there in front of you. I haven't got them in front of me at the moment, but we have a regional livestock facility at the moment which is in surplus, in inverted commas, and you might like to pick up the argument from there.
It's certainly an interesting discussion, and there was a figure I heard that you've got $23 million sitting in the bank. Why wouldn't you continue to own the sale yards? Because you're making money. And there's two parts. Certainly there's no bank account with $23 million sitting in there. That's not correct. But the other part is that you don't not sell an asset just because it's making money. In fact, I would suggest to you that most businesses do sell an asset when it's making money, because it's the good time to sell a business. If you've got a business that's bleeding money, that's losing money, and you go to the market, exactly right. The crucial part for me, and again, keep in mind, Richard, no decision has been made about whether or not the sales will be sold. There's an expression of interest process out. It could be sold, it could be leased, or it could be maintained by council. But the bottom line is, at the moment, it's being subsidised by ratepayers of Dubbo. And that's not in terms of the day-to-day running. People look at the day-to-day running and they go, look at that, you made money. And there is money to be made on a straight P&L on a day-to-day basis. But where you come undone in terms of that asset returning a good return for Dubbo is the actual capital infrastructure. Incredibly expensive capital infrastructure. We've got plans over the next 10 years to spend over $12 million on the capital. Over the next 20 years, about $46 million.
Now, if you look at the income against that $12 million, that is where the surplus is in deficit, and you can see it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, again, people that want us to retain the sale, which is fine, it's a democracy, we like to hear all opinions, but people that want us to retain it say it makes good money, why would you get rid of it? Now, again, it does make money on a straight P&L basis, but when you then take into effect the capital infrastructure, then it becomes a bit of a struggle in terms of it making money. But having said that, I remember a long time ago, there was discussion, before I got on council, I remember there was discussion about Rainbow Cottage being sold, and the argument was something similar, where it's making money, why would you sell Rainbow? Now, it wasn't making money to the same extent, but even if it was, let's say, and this is I'm going back more than 20 years ago now, and let's say it was making $50,000 a year. And if someone came along and said to you, we'll pay you $20 million for that asset that's making $50,000 a year, well, from an investment perspective, you would say, well, if I can get $20 million for something, and even though it's making profit of $50,000 a year, well, that's not a great return on investment if it's worth $20 million. I could take that $20 million, I could stick it in the bank at just a moderate 5% interest, and I'm making more money than still retain the asset and running it and owning it. So you've got to look at these things from a financial basis, not just is it in the black or is it in the red? And even if you looked at the P&L, and if someone offers us really good money, then councillors are not doing their duty correctly if we're not looking at all of the information. and again, what money that might return to the ratepayers of Dubbo. Because ultimately, there is nothing in the Local Government Act 1993 that says council must own sale yards. We've got lots of assets we don't have to have. Are they good in terms of the return they're giving to take some of the burden away from ratepayers in terms of the amount of money we need to raise from rates? If they are a good return on the investment, then fine, we should have them. Do they do other things for the community? And this is one of the other arguments. They return about $80 million into our economy. That's great, and we don't have any argument against that. We don't need to own them to return that money into the economy. Fletcher International Abattoirs is not owned by council. It returns a huge amount of money to our economy just with the employment alone. Council doesn't need to own it for that. And in fact, there might be an argument that I've heard from some people that says if the sale yards were run by an external organisation that just focused on running sale yards, they'd make that $80 million injection into the community $120 million because they'd run it a lot better than council. Because remember, we've got lots of things to run. We're not specialists in running sale yards. So there's a whole range of different arguments back and forth there. I really can't give you a clear direction yet until we see the EOIs that come in. But in answer to that first question, no, we don't have a bank account with $23 million lazy change that's sitting around there waiting to be spent on something. It makes money on a straight P&L but doesn't make money when we take into account the capital infrastructure.
Indeed. I mean, and as I said, I've looked at the figures. I mean, the argument though still comes back to, I hear this in the street, and a person said to me the other day, oh yeah, as soon as someone else takes it, they'll stick up the prices and people will take their cattle and they'll take their sheep somewhere else.
So let's pretend I find a confectionery shop. I've got a shop that I want to buy, and I've decided there's a confectionery shop and they sell lollies for 10 cents a lolly. And I decide, well, I'm going to buy this. I've looked at the figures. I'm going to buy this shop. And is my objective when I buy that shop to reduce the number of customers I've got or increase? Of course, to increase the number of customers. There's no good me investing in that confectionery shop and then driving all the customers away. So I buy the shop that sells confectionery for 10 cents a lolly, and then I put my price up to 20 cents a lolly, and all my customers leave. So what do? Do I close the shop? Do I throw away that money I invested, or do I say...
No, you go back and sell it 9 cents.
Maybe. Exactly right. So what I'm going to do, if I individually buy any business, I want to increase the patronage. I want to increase my bottom line, definitely. But if I put my prices up so much that I drive all the customers away, well, I need customers. So if someone external bought the sale yards and then put the prices up so high that all the people that are selling sheep and cattle decide to go to other sale yards around the state, then that person who bought that investment would say, well, that was a dud investment. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to walk away from it? No, they're going to change their model to make sure they keep attracting customers. In fact, who knows? They might put their prices down to keep attracting more people there. It's hard to say what they do, but I'm guarantee one thing, they're going to do everything they can to increase the overall business of the sale yards. And that would be profitability, that would be the number of customers. They'd try and run it better than council is running it at the moment. So they're not interested in driving people away.
Can I just say again, people with this $23 million, go and look at the figures all the way through and you'll see exactly how it's run. Yes, you'll see there is a surplus, but you'll then see on other figures that it is the ratepayers of Dubbo are subsidising the sale yards. And Matt, thanks for providing me with the figures. It was good fun going through them. Now, you've got to quash this rumour. You went to the Ningen show and officially opened it. One question, why? Second question, did you do that for political purposes? Because rumour has it that you are going to stand for the federal seat of Parkes now that Mark Colton is retiring. Start with the Ningen show first of all. Why did you open it?
First, it's an interesting question because I asked the same question. I got a phone call from the Ningen Show Society and they said, would you like to come out to the Ningen Show and open the show? And I'm always very conscious of other mayors in other areas and I don't want to step on their toes.
Yeah, I thought you'd be stepping on a toe.
That's right. And I know Glenn quite well, Glenn Neal. I deal with him with various things that we do with the Alliance of Western Councils. And I said, well, thank you very much for the offer. I really appreciate that offer. But you've got the mayor there, Glenn Neal, and I assume that he would be opening the show and formally announcing it open. They said, well, normally he would be, but the business that Glenn owns is Neal Earthmoving, and Neal Earthmoving has been the major sponsor of the show for a little while, so they figure it looks a little bit conflicted when the owner of Neil Earth Moving stands up as the mayor, Glenn Neil, and says, I officially declare the Neil Earth Moving Nyngan show open as the mayor of Nyngan. So they said, we actually like someone different to open the show. And I spoke to Glenn about it and made sure that he was okay. And they said, no problems at all. And they said, look, and you've got a bit of knowledge about technology. Can you do us a 10-minute talk on technology while you're opening the show? I said, that's fine. I'm happy to do that. So as far as I was concerned, it was a simple process. They actually even offered to pay me to come out and do that. And I said, no, you don't need to pay me. It's okay. I'm happy to do this for free for you. And so I went out to Nyngan, did a little 10-minute talk on technology, and then formally declared the Nyngan show open. As far as I was concerned, it was a nice little favour for a neighbouring council.
Enough.
That was it.
Okay, the big one. Are you going to stand as an independent, a member of a political party if you want to join one, and become the next federal member for Parks? And then we'll see you looking after Geurie, Dubbo and Broken Hill. Are you going to do it?
Well, it's an interesting question as well, and I have given no thought to it whatsoever. I couldn't even tell you when the next federal election was being held, but I want to go back a little bit. There were some people who were spreading rumours about me back after I stood for council back in 2021 and got back onto council, became mayor again, and then some people started saying, the only reason that Matthew's doing this is because you've got a state government election in 2023, so this will boost his profile for the March 2023 election, and he's definitely standing to try and beat Dougal as an independent for the 2023 election after boosting his profile. Now, let me tell you, Richard, the primary motivator for me standing in 2021 was that I was disappointed with how Dubbo Regional Council was being run by the last group of councillors. And it wasn't just me that was disappointed. You had the state government who put a performance improvement order on our council. Now, that's
exactly right.
That's one step away from being put under administration. I wasn't keen to see Dubbo under administration. We'd obviously had 2 councillors resign from the last council. We had a suicide attempt by a councillor in the last council. It obviously was not going that well. The council's reputation across the state from people that I'd spoken to in government was pretty poor. So my primary motivator was, well, I'm pretty passionate about Dubbo. I can sit aside and just say, well, I've done my bit. I was mayor before. I've made my contribution. Let someone else do it. Or I could put my hand up and think that I could make a contribution helping to get our reputation back to where it should be. So that was my primary motivator. I put my hand up, was lucky enough to be elected and lucky enough to come back as mayor. The state government election came along. I had zero intention of putting my hand up because there was still so much work to be done for local government. My only objective at this stage, the only decision I've got to make in the near future is the 14th of September this year, when the next local government election is on, I've got to make a decision about whether I'm going to stand there or not. Has enough repair work been done? Am I happy to say it's now in good hands, let it go, or it still needs some more repair work to be done? I need to stay there to keep working on that. But that's the only thing I'm thinking about is 14th September. And I know you're going to ask me
my next question. You're going to continue on in council?
Well, I don't know that. I've got to make up my mind about that yet. So I'm not even thinking about federal election.
Bet you will.
Well, I haven't made any decision about that yet.
Yeah, sure. Come on.
But that's the only decision I've got to make, not worrying about a federal election. So I can say absolutely, definitely, positively at this stage, I have no idea what I'm doing in terms of federal election because my only thing I've got to think about is the local government election. How's that? Does that help?
A bit.
Well, it certainly helped one thing. I was at the Nyngan show because the Nyngan show asked me to come along and open it, not for any political reason out there.
Well done. And finally, here we go, the limerick of the week. Your best score so far has been 7, so you've got to try and beat that this week. And I think that might be easily done. Let's have a listen anyway.
I want to bring Mark Barnes back. He was a much easier scorer than you. Mark used to give me much higher score than 7, so 7's my best so far, so we'll see how we go this week. At the Wellington caves, quite renowned, goats munching on grass can be found. They nibble away, keeping fires at bay, as they graze all around the cave's ground.
8.5.
Oh, yes, I'm getting better. I'm on a roll.
Okay.
Rightio, and thank you. This may well be your last week. I saw Mark Barnes on a plane coming back, so Mark Barnes might be back with us next week, but thank you for filling in. I appreciate your time, and if Mark's away again, if you're happy to step in again, I'd love to have you back again.
Thanks, mate. It's been good fun. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Excellent.
straight from the mayor's mouth with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.